Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, quick match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Zuhua Lake, playing as the Dwarves against the Vampire Counts. So, as you can see here, we are doing a bit of a rush build, and on this map I think, especially against the Vampires, it's rather decent. Due to this ridge, this crest, it's very hard to use artillery here. I do believe this is the very edge of your spawn zone, so even if you deploy artillery on the very edge, you need to trundle them forward to about here to get shots down onto the low ground, which is really kind of not good. And I figured a Vanguard build, obviously the Vampires don't have any shooting, so why not? Might as well give it a shot. So I did bring some shooting here, and you can see that's the Bugman's Rangers in the back, but going through the build quickly, we did bring Thorgrim Grudgebearer. If you're going rush build, I figure he's a pretty good choice. He doesn't provide any defensive buffs, really, but he does provide frenzy effect if his HP drops below 50%. He does provide the Great Book of Grudges, which is a great +9 melee attack, and that's almost that's +9% chance to hit. Buff within a 55-meter area, which is pretty huge. It's hitting both of these Longbeards with great weapons, as well as the Northern's Ironbreakers and the Grumbling Guard and the Runesmith, so very powerful. I did bring Foeseeker and Stand Your Ground for that extra defense. On the flanks, we do have two Runesmiths. Or actually, no, never mind, I lied. One Runesmith. This guy does have the Rune of Oath and Steel, as well as Forge Fire. Wow, I'm completely slipping up here. He doesn't have the Rune of Oath and Steel. I did bring the Rune of Wrath and Ruin and the Rune of Negation, figuring my opponent would bring a bunch of AP. He also does have Forge Fire, which will affect these Longbeards with great weapons, providing them with additional 10% damage, which I'm not entirely sure what that adds up to on them. 10%, you're probably looking at three more damage. Actually, I'm not entirely sure what their baseline is. It might be a little lower. It might be like 34 damage, in which case. Oh yeah, it is 34, so it's getting bumped up by 3. And then I do have a Thane on the other end with a Tormentor Sword, of course, to intercept my opponent. I am back in my front line is composed of Grumbling's Ironbreakers, as well as 3 units of Longbeards with great weapons. In the center, we do have the Grumbling Guard to provide that Vigor aura. The Grumbling Guard does trade off their charge defense against large, so that is rather important, I think, to keep in mind. And that's also one of the additional reasons to actually keep it in the back line. If your opponent brings, say, a bunch of Cryptars or some Knights, this way your Grumbling Guard's safe against the charge. In the back, I do have the Slayers and the Dragonback Slayers to defend against large targets and chop up zombies, and then 2 units of Bugman's Rangers. And the Bugman's Rangers are very cool. They do have immunity to psychology. They're actually one of those units where they have several special traits, and none of them are really tied to any debuffs or tied to any leadership levels or anything like that, which makes these guys incredibly tough nuts to crack. They've got Liquid Fortification, which is a constant source of regeneration. They do have Stalk. They do have immunity to psychology, and this is a permanent immunity to psychology. They do have Vanguard. They do have charge defense against large, which is rather amazing on a large, on a shooting unit. The only other shooting unit that has that is the Lothern Seaguard. And their melee stats are rather good. They do have 2 more ammo than normal Rangers. They fire a little faster than Rangers. They don't have better damage. Same range, they just fire faster and have 2 more ammo, but their melee stats are far superior. With 38 melee defense and baseline of, I do believe, 24 melee attack. This is, I do believe, being buffed by Thorgrim right now. They can tear through zombies rather quickly and defend themselves, and they're not really going to take much damage from zombies, from bats, from direwolves even. They'll be able to tear all those units up, and even if your opponent gets, say, like here my opponent brought a Terrorgeist into the fray, they can beat him up pretty good. Now for my opponent's build, a bit of interesting sort of mobbing build. 4 units of zombies sheltering the front. You can see skeleton warriors behind that. My opponent did kind of push forward a little bit and then decided to pull back. And a little tidbit on the Bugman's Rangers. The reason I brought 2 of them is actually specifically to counter Mortis Engines, which the Dwarves have trouble catching. Well, they can't even catch them unless you get Dragonback Slayers on them, or lucky Tormentor Sword, or Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Mortis Engine can outrun you and just escape. So, and he has a huge mass, so it's very hard to intercept and stop a Mortis Engine from fleeing. So I did want to be able to shoot it down. You can see my opponent's front line here. Zombies, backed by some skeleton warriors. So a very chaff-heavy front line meant to shelter the Mortis Engine. 2 Cairn Wraiths, an interesting pick here. Not necessarily a bad pick, though their melee attack is very low, and it is magical, which means that they're only going to be doing 33 damage against the Dwarves, since 25% of it is lost to magic resistance. 2 Graveguard with great weapons are in the back line. You can see the Sternsmen anchoring things in the center. So this is definitely going to give my troops a run for their money, though still no match for the Grumbling's Ironbreakers. A single Banshee with a Potion of Strength, and she can definitely do some work. And one of the things that's important to keep in mind about ethereal units against Dwarves is that the Dwarves do not have much in the way of magic damage, unless you bring the Peak Gate Guard. You don't really have magic damage, and so while Cairn Wraiths might not be doing as much damage, they are also not taking very much damage from Dwarves. On the flank, we do have Heinrich Kemmler, of course, which is actually a bit of a surprise, but at the same time, he can, of course, be very potent. And if we look at what he's brought, what has Heinrich Kemmler brought for us today? He does have Krell, which is, of course, a very potent summon. Cloak of Mist and Shadows, a great little perk here to defend against the Dowie. Undeath Resurgent to provide defense buffs, basically just stand your ground. Wind of Death, Raise Dead, Gaze of Nagash, and Invocation of Nehek. So, interestingly enough, the Gaze of Nagash, that's a little surprising. Not entirely sure why, but perhaps there's a reason. Chaos Tombblade as well, and this is definitely a very potent sort of buff, providing +5 melee attack. Very solid for undead, and also providing constant healing aura. So, on top of the healing aura he already provides being a necromancer. Finally, my opponent does have a Terrorgeist, and this is, I think, really the only really questionable pick here. The problem with the Terrorgeists, despite having armor piercing and being large and causing terror and all that, you can see here Breath Attack does wipe out quite a few Bugman's Rangers. But the problem with the Terrorgeist against the Dwarves is that his melee stats are pretty terrible. 42 melee defense is okay, 80 armor, whatever, it's okay. But only 26 melee attack with a bonus against large. Granted, there's poison in there, but against the Dwarves, the only large units they have is Gyrocopters, which the Terrorgeist can't catch, and then Thorgrim on his chair, and the Rune Lords on their anvils. So the Terrorgeist really doesn't have that much potency. And if it does dive down here, try to get greedy, the Bugman's Rangers aren't going to rout. They have immunity to psychology, and my Slayers will tear a new one. So it's really, I'm not a big fan of the Terrorgeist in this matchup, though perhaps my opponent had a specific goal in mind. I'm not entirely sure. It's sometimes people build specific strats. I know I do sometimes as well, just to try and bring units you wouldn't normally bring because they have something specific in mind. So my opponent had that in mind. I'd love to know what. Definitely cool. Over here in the center, you can see the zombies and the Cairn Wraiths grinding it out against the Norgrim's Ironbreakers. Stand your ground is going down. Thorgrim Grudgebearer is in the midst of things here. You can see the Norgrim's Ironbreakers still lobbing a few grenades here and there, and and now my opponent does try to push the Mortis Engine into the fray, but he is getting zoned away by the mass fire from the Bugman's Rangers. My opponent does push the Banshee around. She is trying to beat up on the Thane, but the Banshee doesn't have the best of melee stats against the Thane's rather high tankiness, so it's going to be rough for her to do very much. And of course, Fear and Terror doesn't affect Longbeards, and this is actually one of the main reasons I brought Longbeards here. I know that they're not going to break the psychology, and they do have slightly better melee stats. In the center here, the Norgrim's Ironbreakers are going to be almost indestructible to all of these units. I did hit these Cairn Wraiths with a Rune of Wrath and Ruin, Rune of Negation going down over here on the blob. These Longbeards just holding their own against these zombies, and they'll hold well against Skeleton Warriors. And this center here is going rather well. You can see the Mortis Engine getting slaughtered by fire. My opponent does dive into the backline, but I do believe I had these guys on guard mode, so despite getting poisoned and being harassed here, it doesn't matter too much. The Slayers will get on top of the Terrorgeist, and they'll be able to harass it and beat it down pretty quick. And you can see I'm trying to get these Dragonback Slayers into the fray, and these Bugman's Rangers still haven't lost a model. You can see they're on 47 models. They did lose a model just there, but really it's going okay, and you can see this Terrorgeist is getting beaten up. My opponent does actually get a Wind of Death here, and I was trying to scatter seconds before, but too little too late. And I do believe this was not an overcast Wind of Death, so it doesn't wipe out too many troops, and the Slayers who have higher than average model HP are basically unaffected. Well, that's one of the big problems with Wind of Death. You have to get an overcast, otherwise it is basically a useless spell. The Mortis Engine has already hit its healing cap, though it still has a little bit of space there, but it's getting annihilated, and you can see that Bugman's Ranger Fire is going to bring it low, despite Invocation from the Heck going down. The problem with the Mortis Engine is it only has 40 armor, and despite the fact that it looks all ghosty and creepy and spooky and scary, it doesn't actually have physical resistance. I think the Claw of Nagash might, not entirely sure, but the vanilla Mortis Engine does not. Anytime, of course, a Thorgrim Grudgebearer slugging it out, but my opponent did summon, or did bring the Banshee over to beat down a Thorgrim, but Thorgrim has monstrous melee defense at 62. The highest melee defense, I do believe, of any Dwarf Lord, and actually higher even, and actually comparable to Ironbreakers. So definitely, Ironbreakers I think I set at 69. Now I do try to intercept Krell here with Slayers, but my opponent summons zombies to block them. Zombies won't do very much, but at the same time they will deny me the opportunity to get the Slayers in there and support the front line, which is buckling. You can see the Cairn Wraiths, and this definitely shows how much damage the Cairn Wraiths can be doing to the Sternsmen. You can see these Grave Longbeards are just slowly but surely getting chipped away at by the enveloping Graveguard, by the Cairn Wraiths, and they're getting torn to shreds. Now granted, they will fight with that Dowie indomitability, but they are going to get slaughtered. Over here, though, the Skeleton Warriors are getting massacred by the Great Weapons. Over on the flank, the Great Weapons are getting hewn through by the Grumbling Guard and the Norgrim's Ironbreakers, who have only lost one model. Thorgrim is going to be able to hold his own there. And on the flank, the Thane and Longbeards are mopping up the skeletons. Even as my Bugman's Rangers are going to be able to start firing. You can see Rune of Wrath and Rune going on down on the Cairn Wraiths, my only real source of magic damage. You can see they're being healed up by Krell being in the fight, or Kemmler, sorry, being in the fight. And I'm using the Bugman's Rangers on these guys as well. These guys have 0 armor, so despite the 75% missile resist, there will still be there will still be 5 damage per shot coming out of these Bugman's Rangers going through straight into these guys. So that's very important. They don't have the highest of HP, so if you can break that, it's amazing. Over here, the Dragonback Slayers are slugging out with the Terrorgeist, who they'll be able to bring low pretty quickly. While here in the pits, Thorgrim Grudgebearer is actually in a bit of a danger. You can see Krell has come in, the Banshees come in with Potion of Strength. They're hitting like trucks, and Thorgrim has dropped quite a bit. Obviously, he's not nowhere near critical levels, but definitely getting beaten up, and he overextended a little bit. So I'm trying to force path him back through to save his life. Krell does have okay melee stats as well, 50 to 50, and he does have 470 weapon strength AP, so very potent. You can see Thorgrim there dropping quite a bit. And the Longbeards, though, do pile in here, and they're going to be able to collapse the Graveguard pretty quickly as Tormentor Sword does go down, locking all these heroes in place, and my opponent is not going to be able to push through this. A breath attack does go down on the Bugman's Rangers, dropping them once again by about 12 models, but not enough. You can see the Cairn Wraiths here being shelled away at by all that arrow fire. The Slayers have dove in to hold the ground, the line, as have these Longbeards. Longbeards don't outtrade Graveguard with great weapons, I don't believe. Longbeards with great weapons are actually kind of mediocre as far as great weapon infantry goes. Their melee stats are rather low. Most of it comes from their benefits come from their charge defense, their immunity psychology, and their leadership bonuses. But I do manage to kind of crush this flank over here. You can see my opponent does summon some zombies to buy himself some time. But with the Norgormling's Ironbreakers in here, the Longbeards, the Rumbling Guard and all that, and now the Thane diving in, I'm going to be able to buckle with Krell. I'm going to be able to... you can see this Dragonback Slayers here still chasing that Terrorgeist, even as it does dive on the Bugman's Rangers, who are almost out of ammo. But I'm going to be able to kind of tie this flank down and start moving troops over to the left flank, which has been buckling for a while. You can see Norgormling's Ironbreakers throwing grenades in there, or their satchel charges, making those wraiths fall apart, which I've been focusing on for a while now, knowing that I can crack everything else with my normal melee troops. And you can see the Graveguard just getting slaughtered now. And of course, with Thorgrim providing that melee attack buff, things are going to be very rough for my opponent. The Runesmith is still very much alive. Norgormling's Ironbreakers have only lost 2 models and have racked up 91 kills. On the flank, the Thane is not doing too hot, but at the same time, he is just helping hold the line here, while the Grumbling Guard and Longbeards mop up some troops over there. Over here, the Dragonback Slayers are pursuing the Terrorgeist, laying a bit of a smackdown on him. You can see he's getting massacred, dragged into the pits, and really at this point it's just a basically just end game. My opponent is surrounded here. Stand Your Ground is going down from Thorgrim. Thorgrim is searching to duel Heinrich, because that's not fair to Heinrich at all. Thorgrim, despite Thorgrim not being sort of a duelist hero or very oriented to that sort of stuff, he's still pretty good. And you can see actually, and this is pretty cool. Oftentimes you don't notice. I don't want to say maybe not notice, but you don't. Always get to see the effect, but you can see here with all my troops having high leadership and Thorgrim having dropped below 50%, you can see that high king buff is going down, providing plus a frenzy, and you can see plus 8 melee attack is huge. These Longbeards are suddenly up to 47 melee attack. You can see the Grumbling Guard up to 51 because their leadership is so high. The Slayers, of course, unbreakable, so flawless leadership, up to 55 melee attack, and they are just tearing through my foes here. The Norgormling's Ironbreakers up to 57 melee attack and 36 weapon strength. They get a much bigger boost because they're not an AP unit, so just so very powerful. You can see over here the Dragonback Slayers chasing off this filthy Terrorgeist, as my opponent's army simply is going to crumble and fall into the dust, and you can see it's just going to disintegrate here at the end. And it was very cool to see that high king buff go off. It's one of those things I feel that you don't always get to see, because Thorgrim is so tanky that usually if you're winning a game, he's not taking that much damage, but nonetheless you did get to see it go off there, and it was a huge buff to the troops. So nonetheless, you can see a rather hilarious performance from all of these troops now. Hundreds of kills for most of them. Longbeards is 209, 108, 168. Slayers sitting at 161. Definitely the champions there, though, I would say, were the Bugman's Rangers, actually. Because, one, they baited down my opponent's Terrorgeist repeatedly, forced it to try to tie down my backline, because my opponent hadn't committed too heavily into that. And they also did shut down the Mortis Engine. And the Mortis Engine, if it's allowed to sit and sap away at your troops, a unit like Norgormling's Ironbreakers is essentially doomed. They're put on a clock, and the Mortis Engine can melt away at them, and as long as Norgormling's Ironbreakers are tied down by chaff, they can't do anything about it, and even if they aren't tied down by chaff, they can't catch a Mortis Engine, so they can die to it. The Dragonback Slayers also did a great job protecting the Bugman's Rangers, so I think these are some units here that didn't rack up stats, though they did rack up some chevrons, and actually kind of made sure the game went well. The front line obviously was going to win, especially against this sort of chaff-heavy army. Surprisingly, some skeleton warriors in here getting 13 kills, which, given that the units they were fighting were pretty tough nuts, is a bit surprising. The Karen Wraiths definitely, I think, a little bit of an iffy pick. Now, they can be good, and I don't want to say they were a bad pick, but you definitely need to give them, I think, proper melee attack support so that they can break through that defense on the Dwarves. And of course, their Fear and Terror, which is also a big benefit of them, isn't that useful against the Stunties either. Graveguard did a decent job. Sternsmen, of course, good job as always. I'm always surprised by how well these guys do against any sort of unit. They tend to do well even against Great Weapon Infantry just because of their monstrous melee defense and decent melee attack stats and regen. Mortis Engine had a terrible day, and the Terrorgeist, despite raking at 38 kills, most of that was with its breath attacks. It did very little in melee, and just wasn't really paying for itself. Definitely, had my opponent brought 2 Black Knights and just normal Black Knights backed by a handful of Flyers, that could have definitely been a much bigger problem for me. Even if they suicided on top of the Bugman's Rangers, as long as they got those Bugman's Rangers either depleted to the point that they couldn't compete or wiped them out, I would have been in a very bad spot because that Mortis Engine would have constantly been draining me. This front line could have held for a very long time, definitely a much longer time than it held with the Bugman's Rangers wailing on it, and I think definitely the battle could have definitely had a much different outcome. Because the Mortis Engine does provide that healing and that drain effect and extra winds of magic and everything, so very potent. So nonetheless, great game to my opponent here, RSD. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions, or anything like that, be sure to leave them down below and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.